Hi everyone, and welcome back to the latest instalment of the Journey to M365 E5 series. So to recap, I'm Ryan Mulliner, one of the commercial executives here at Bytes, and I'll let Andrew and Abby introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Abbey Long. I'm Microsoft Security Specialist at Bytes.
I'm Andrew Ward. I'm a services specialist at Bytes.
So today we wanted to look at our quantum toolset and also our cloud advisory service reports. Andrew's going to give us a demo of quantum to show us how that looks and how that helps you.
Thanks, Ryan. So in terms of the quantum toolset, so to those of you that are new to the quantum toolset, so what is the quantum toolset? So quantum toolset is split into two parts. It's quantum for Azure and quantum for 365. For this particular podcast, we'll be focusing on the 365 side. So what do we use Quantum 365 for, and what are the benefits of the tool set? So Quantum 365 gives our customers the ability to understand the licensing currently sitting within their organization. It helps them understand which users are allocated which licenses. It helps them to understand how they are utilizing the licenses, as we'll go into in a second. But then also other pieces around how you can optimize your 365 licensing estate as well. It identifies opportunities around where you might be able to move users into different license groups. So, for example, you might be able to move users into shared mailboxes, depending on their current usage. It also highlights opportunities to remove licenses from people that have already left the organization. So if there are lapses or sort of changes in the joiners, movers, leavers process, the toolset is able to identify where those licenses currently sit and help users put those back into a pot so that they don't have to necessarily go out and purchase additional licenses. They can just use the licenses that they currently have. So what you're seeing here is a viewpoint on our license plan usage. And this is quite a key thing we're looking at adopting E5, but altogether really looking at our adoption across any of the Microsoft licensing SKUs. So on the screen here, appreciate it's quite busy, but what this is giving us sort of all the information that we need to start making decisions around, what are our users using and how can we use this information. So what we can see here in a kind of very quick summary is we can see here key things to point out. So firstly, we can focus in on our account aging and inactivity. So this is kind of aligned to what I touched upon earlier around looking at users where, for example, over 180 days, these people that significant chance they might have left the organization, but they still have a license assigned. So let's have a look and drill down into those individual users and see where we can pull licenses from and put those over to potentially new starters or people that are changing a license plan. But what we can also focus in on for this particular example, we can look around our active users. So who's currently sitting in the organization and what are they currently utilizing? So if we just click here, what that will do is that will narrow everything down to our current users sitting in the organization. So we can see here on the left-hand side, we can focus on our particular SKUs. Now, within this demo environment, we've got what we call an E3 house, an organization that's predominantly using Microsoft 365 E3. And by selecting that, what that's going to then do is that's going to then give us all the visibility on the right-hand side. Now, this is one of sort of the key parts to the tool set when we're looking at sort of the license plan usage. So within each license SKU, as we all know, there's different license plans, and depending on the SKU, you get different plans. So, for example, as we know from E5, there's a significant number of components that fits within that SKU, and then as we go down through the Microsoft SKUs, we sort of start to see things being pulled away and different things applied. So
what is the biggest difference between kind of the license investment and the license and consumed cost? Because that's kind of the biggest thing that stands out to me when you initially look at this page.
Yeah, so it's a good question, Abby. So a license assignment value is essentially how many of those licenses have been given out to individuals. So how many of those licenses are currently being, essentially how many users have got those licenses and the cost attributed to it. So let's base this off the cost of an E3 license is worth nearly £30. Ultimately, we're just looking at how many of those have been divvied out. We then look at actually the utilization number. We're actually looking at, well, how many of those licenses are actually being used. Typically we tend to see a slight gulf in these numbers because naturally we tend to find, people on annual leave or maybe maternity leave, long-term sick leave, they may not have their licenses removed. What we don't want to see is huge gulps between these numbers, where we've got a significant amount of license investment sitting with license accounts, but actually a lot of those license accounts are not using those licenses. And what the Quantum toolset allows us to do is it allows us to understand who those users are. So over here on the right-hand side, we can see here. So if we filter it from a planned consumption within the last 30 days. So looking at all of our E3 users in our organization, we can look at how many of them have used certain plans sitting within that SKU. And what we firstly start to see is we start to see particular trends. So we start to see, well, which are the products within our organization that our users are using most. So no sort of real surprise here to see that an office subscription is sort of sitting there at the top. Other things around Azure Active Directory, Premium, and so on and so forth, things that are sitting within our SKU, and we can see how these are being adopted across the organization. And then as we go down, we can start to see other things that we're using within our organization, and obviously we can start to drill down into specific areas. So one side of this is obviously understanding, well, what are the key features that we need? What are the features that are our users using? And potentially then how do we license that moving forward? Are we then looking at E5? Are we pulling out components that our users are using and thinking about how we can utilize that into a different license plan? But then also as well, there is the other side of it around adoption. So we've currently got there's a good number of plans sitting within a SKU. How do we adopt that as much as possible? And that's kind of the other side that sometimes we don't necessarily think about when we're looking through our different licenses, but ultimately these products exist for a reason. These products offer a lot of value to an organization, to our customers. So what we're looking to identify as well, let's look at, for example, here, Power Apps for Office 365. So we've only got one account out of 73 using that at the moment. Now, that might be a case of that's a particularly sort of siloed user who needs that technology stack specifically, but that also might mean that we've got another 72 users that could be using it, but choosing to potentially just not use it, or maybe even use other tool sets that you might even have to be going out into the market and purchasing in addition to this from other suppliers. So it's all about understanding what we currently have and how we're utilizing it. And that's kind of a key component when we're looking at moving forward into, what our license plan is going to be moving forward.
Yeah, Andrew, I find when I'm with profiling with customers when it comes to what technology they're using, is there a way we can use Quantum to group or create profiles to see usage for certain areas of the business?
Yeah, we can do. So if we move over to our usage grouping, what we can see is just waiting for it to load. Perfect. So what we would see here within this environment, these would be our actual usernames. You can see here on the left-hand side, but the demo environment, we've kind of redacted that information within this example. But what you can do is you can group your users within the toolset. So let's just say make it nice and easy. You've got two departments. You've got a finance department and you've got a HR department. Finance department you've given a full E5 license to, and the HR department you've given a full E3 license to. What you can do is you can group them using the tool set to understand how their adoption of certain products is, and ultimately gives you a viewpoint on what they're currently doing. So what that helps us to do is, if we then start to move some of our HR users into E5, we can start to draw comparisons in terms of their productivity and their usage versus those that are currently sitting within E3. And what we can do from there, if we start rolling that ball a little bit further, and it helps us to understand, well, how many of the components are currently being used, and do we then think about E5 moving forward for the remainder of those HR users? So it doesn't necessarily have to be from a departmental point of view. It can just be two people in the same team. We've got two people doing the same job. Let's give one of them an E3 license. Let's give one of them an E5 license. Or it can be, let's give one of them an E3 license. Let's give one of them a business premium license. It doesn't have to be obviously that way, but we can ultimately see how they perform based on, what their performance looks like using the licenses they've got. And Quantum's able to break that down and kind of show you, the granularity that ultimately you need when you're making these decisions. We know that, the license SKU that you choose moving forward isn't something that you decide overnight. You really need to kind of put some thought into it, really put the work in to understand, what is it from a business strategy point of view that we need, and Quantum supplements a lot of those conversations.
And just going back onto the SKU adoption page, sorry, Andrew. On the bottom there, where it just kind of has the workings out of the total unused, what data does that use? Is that kind of just the data that it's pulled above to work out what is unassigned, and then work out what's kind of unused from those assigned licenses as well?
So where Quantum is pulling the data from is we're looking at key things such as when that user previously logged in, and we're then also obviously from there able to understand the licenses that they've been currently assigned. So looking at our account list, which is essentially a top to bottom of every user that we've currently got sitting in our Active Directory. Again, in a live environment, we'll be seeing our individual user's actual name here, but from a base level, what we can start to see is we can see the licenses that are assigned to that user. We can see the licensing costs associated with that new user. So we've got two examples here where we've got one user here with a 365 E3 and got a Flow free license. Now, I know that Flow free is obviously a free of charge license. So they're sitting there with an E3 license at £29.50. Go down to our next user, we can see here they've got different licenses assigned to them. So we can see there here the inclusion of their Power BI Pro license, which obviously is included within an E5. So again, we can start to look at, well, how is they, actually to rethink that, Power BI Pro is an E5, isn't it? Okay. From the top, 3, 2, 1. So with this particular user, we can see here that they've got additional licenses added in here. So for example, we have a Power BI Pro license, which is included within E5. So we can see here how and why their cost as a user is different to the one above. Now, if we started to scan along, we can start to see some sort of important information around when their last sign-in date was. So when we look at information around, our inactive and active users, quite a key part of that is focusing in on our accounts that have last signed in. So what we can start to filter out is, well, let's have a look at our users that have signed in the last month, or potentially those that haven't signed in the last month. And this builds out that picture around, well, who are our users that are, assigned, but potentially not utilizing those licenses. And I think one of the the easiest ways to start doing that using the tool set is we can look at filtering out by who of our users are disabled users. So who have we already removed access to, but we've still got a license sitting there. And what we'll see is, if I filter this the right way, we filter it the wrong way, we can see here is there's already significant license investment sitting with users that have already left the organization. Now, these are ultimately licenses where we can start to put them back into the pot. So you can see here we've got a number of E3s here that are sitting there. So already I can kind of count from my screen, probably 12, 13 E3 licenses that can go back into our pot. So, well, what does that mean? So that means a few things. So firstly, obviously, it means that we can sort of reharmonize with our Active Directory. We can start to put those licenses back into a pot, making sure that we're not out, necessarily purchasing new licenses. But also as well, from a budgetary point of view, it actually helps us to understand what a real budget is and what our actual, what we're actually using. If we're purchasing, let's just say 120, 130% of licenses that we actually require, we've actually got a significant chunk of budget there that we can start to think about, well, how do we use that moving forward? Typical classic example I speak to most customers about, when going through this data, there may be 1,000-seat organization. Now, typically, of course, they're not going to buy 1,000 licenses because, you've got room for people joining. But if you're a 1,000-seat organization, you don't need 1,500 licenses unless you're planning rapid expansion, or unless you're going to be, there's going to be some sort of hostile takeover or something where suddenly people are going to be moving in. So, how do we work out how many users we've got versus how many licenses we require? And that goal for, say 450 licenses, if we factor in a little bit of leeway on top of 1,000 users, well, how can we reuse that budget? We might actually be able to start thinking about moving over to E5. It's what we want, it's what we need. But previously it's been out of our reach because we haven't been licensing correctly. So that's one of the key things that the Quantum toolset is going to give you the visibility of, is actually understanding, how many users that we have in our organization, which sounds like such a simple thing, but so often when we're doing sort of these tidy up exercises, I always use the analogy, and anyone I've been on a call with will probably be sitting there going, "Don't use it, Andrew." But I always use it. I always say we're really good at, customers are really good at tidying up the living room, but they always forget to look under the sofa. And there's always opportunities sort of sitting in there to reduce our spend where it is.
So for customers that are unsure if this is going to really assist them on a day-to-day basis and their cost optimization and all of that side of things, is there a small kind of assessment / health check that we're able to offer them to ensure that we are giving them the best solution here?
Yeah, so we've got a few options. So we run Quantum Health Check, Quantum 365 health checks. And what these do is these run in a sort of a read-only capacity in the customer's environment. And over the course of 20 days, we are pulling all the information out that you're seeing here. So looking at the license assignment, looking at the adoption, looking at whether people are, when their last login was, whether they're enabled, disabled, and ultimately provides a report which highlights where we feel there's opportunities to optimize. And that can always be a good starting point, because if we're able to identify those right off the bat, that helps you to understand, well, where could we possibly be looking in, let's just say 3 to 6 months time, if we then start doing the work properly to optimize. We also have roll on, roll off license subscription for Quantum 365. So if customers did want to sort of trial it for we recommend a minimum 3-month period to use that tool set sort of in the run up, not necessarily just even in the run up to a renewal or a conversation around E5, but generally just to use it to sort of help to sort of clean up the environment, understand what's in there, and to help us make sort of business strategies. And it can sometimes just be a case of looking at it ahead of the end of your own FY. Let's just say your Microsoft renewals in February. Well, if your FY starts in August, a bit of a random one, I don't know whose FY starts in August, but you've got kind of a difference there between when you've got to be purchasing your Microsoft licenses and when you've got to report back to the business how much expenditure you're going to be using in the next year. And you almost have to sort of be able to sort of predict that and start to facilitate those decisions, 6-7 months in advance sometimes. So this is where the tool set can be really handy at kind of looking at what you can potentially looking at moving forward.
So can I assume that the initial assessment / health check that you mentioned is Bytes funded?
Yes, yeah. So it's a free health check. I said, so it runs for 20 days, and then the report's delivered shortly after that. And then what you'll have is you'll have your account manager, and typically a licensing specialist, will read back the report to you as a customer, going through each of the particular areas, explaining the information that's there if required. And then, of course, naturally, then that health check is yours to keep as a customer. So, you can take that away and you can start thinking about the information that's on there based on what we provided.
Great. So that demo is really helpful, Andrew. Thank you very much for that. Do you have a CAS report that we could look at and start to go into a little bit more detail as to what that looks like as a separate offering of ours as well?
So one better than that, rather than a report, I've got a wonderfully well-crafted deck from our very own Dominic McHugh that kind of goes over sort of how the service and how Bytes can assist customers with looking at potential renewal options moving forward. So this is for our commercial advisory service. This is available to all Bytes customers to essentially look at their renewal, typically from sort of 6 months up 6 months beforehand and up to the renewal, but can be done obviously sort of sooner depending on what requirements are. And ultimately what we're looking to do here is we're looking to help customers get the best commercial option for their Microsoft renewal. Now, there's lots of things that are factored into a commercial advisory service, and I haven't got time to go through all of them, but kind of I suppose when we're looking at our journey to E5, one of the key things we want to focus in on is our areas around our planning and usage. So understanding what we want to be doing forward, and then kind of looking at the options that Microsoft gives us from a renewal point of view. So very quick overview of the service using the slide here we've got. So firstly, baseline. So understanding what our current baseline contract is, what our existing contract looks like, essentially what's that going to look like for us if we go like for like this time round, and then defining what a success criteria is from us as an organization. A key stage then into our planning and usage. So this is kind of, I suppose, partly where those conversations of E5 really start to come forward. We're looking at what our Microsoft technology strategy looks forward. Looking at user profile, we're looking at building out roadmaps as well. So, as we know, renewal conversations, although they potentially, if we're on CSP, it might just be for 12 months, but really we're not just looking at 12 months. We're looking at we're looking at 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Particularly with new products coming into the fray with Copilot. What's that going to look like in 3 years' time? And we start to build that out, and then we move into our kind of our optimization analysis. So, tabling all the options that are available to us. What are the potential risks, for example? So, what are the risks if we don't include certain products within our organization? What are the risks if we decide not to go with a certain, SKU? So that's what the service does. And then finally, from a negotiation point of view, we benchmark that. We make sure that it's obviously, the best option possible, and then we assist our customers with that negotiation stage as we move through with Microsoft. So from a commercial modeling and contract analysis point of view, so the benefit obviously of being Bytes is that we've been a very a significant partner to Microsoft for a long time. We understand Microsoft contracts and we tend to understand the customer's needs that sit alongside that. So using all that information that we have, working with Microsoft and working with Microsoft customers, is we're able to sort of start to model out all licensing scenarios. So, if a customer comes forward to us and says, well, I'm currently using E3, but I do need a bit more security, but I don't know whether or not E5 is the right fit for me. I just know that we need to be more secure. We can start to model that out to your business, understanding, well, if we do move to E5, what other potential solutions do you no longer require? How will E5 fit those needs for you? And we can start to look at the benefits of that. We can then also look at, splitting those out from your users. So, you might say, well, we need, certain areas of our business need certain features, but some of them not so much. Okay, fantastic. Let's look at the whole Microsoft licensing suite. What's going to work for those workers? Take a retailing organization. I always use it as a great example. Typically your store workers, your frontline workers down on the shop floor, they may not necessarily need the same licensing plans as people sitting in your finance department. But it's important that you know that, a one size fits all is rarely the case when we're looking at our Microsoft renewals. So what we're able to do is we're looking to understand the best contract types for you, which give you the best cost and the best flexibility and the best options that exist for you. We can then also break it down into looking at risk assessments as well, understanding sort of any potential risks that might exist, if you chose not to go with a certain product, or if you had a certain product, what gaps need to be filled if you choose to do that. So we work with our customers closely to deliver these. We talk about workshops, and there's a huge emphasis on Bytes to obviously deliver this, but we work so closely with our customers. We in retail organizations very often we'll go on site, we'll do a bit of sort of spot testing with your users there, asking conversations about what are you using your machines for, those types of things as well, to make sure that we're getting the right user profile, because user profiling is hugely important. Because what we want to make sure is that particularly if we're committing to longer term agreements, we want to make sure that we're committing to the right agreements, and these are such important things, which is why the service does take such a significant amount of time, because obviously we have to make sure that we get it right. And then what we get at the end of it is we get essentially a commercial advisory service analysis workbook. We essentially looked at all the options, presented that back to you as a customer so you can see them. So it's not a case of Bytes say that I should do this and therefore I'm doing it. It's a case of Bytes has presented me with all the options and we're working together, and Bytes are guiding me in the right area depending on what we require. So when we're looking at our kind of option review and how we implement these things, so we're focusing, as I said, on sort of reviewing our key areas within our technology, highlighting costs, key cost variances, so looking at what our current contract is versus what it would look like in other periods of time. And this is such a huge part when we're looking at moving through to E5 is customers need to understand all the options that are available to you. There's always such a significant kind of, I suppose, internal pressure sometimes sitting on IT departments. We've got to get the cheapest option, guys. We've got a budget of 3 million. Well, your renewal was 3 million 3 years ago, so it's probably not going to be 3 million again. But if you try to cut corners, you try to change things up to reach that 3 million, sometimes you miss out on opportunities and you're not delivering the right thing for your organization. So we have to factor in budget, of course. We can't just go, right, blank slate, we pay as much as we need to pay just to get what we want. But it's really key that we're working towards budgets to understand what are the key drivers from an organizational point of view. And that's where the planning kicks in. If we plan what we're doing, I say on every call that I speak to customers with, if we plan properly, it's a lot easier to execute than it is if we kind of go into it thinking, well, what should we get moving forward? And technology is improving significantly. Microsoft is always adding new fantastic products. We want to firstly make sure that we're aware of those products and how they fit into our organization. That's kind of one part of what the commercial advisory service does for us.
So Ryan, from your experience kind of doing these CAS services, has that given customers, say from an EA agreement perspective, more negotiation power with Microsoft and kind of having those larger conversations?
100%. With larger customers, I've got numerous ones in different sectors who have used this, and it has been instrumental in those negotiations with Microsoft because there's proof, there's information behind it, and with our relationship with Microsoft, it works really well with saving customers money and plus also making sure they're using the right technologies in the right places.
Yeah, I guess it gives us that overview, that roadmap of what the customer's trying to achieve long term as well. So it makes that a lot easier when forecasting to Microsoft what's expected. going forwards with ourselves and with the customer.
It's backed up with hard evidence to Microsoft, which is always what they want to see, and yeah, it really helps those conversations with them.
Exactly that. And as an example I've got here on the screen, I appreciate it's a bit small and a bit out of place, but that's because you'll see me clicking in a second and you'll see other ones kind of popping onto the screen. But this is a great example here where we've got option 1 and option 4. For some reason options 2 and 3 aren't in there, but I guess that doesn't matter for the purpose of this. But we can see here, well, what are you currently going to be getting with your different plans, looking at your existing agreement versus looking at Microsoft E5 with the security features. And you can see here the inclusions that you're going to be getting with that. So it looks as simple as it's almost seems too simple. We'll just put the 2 options next to one another, and you can kind of get visibility on that. But sometimes you don't get that layer of ability to drill down into that, and particularly if you're an organization looking to almost sort of separate things out by business unit, where you take something as simple as this and you start to magnify that to 15 business units, different locations globally and everything else like that, it suddenly becomes a real headache and a real challenge in terms of what should we be doing. And this is kind of part of why the service exists, because it takes away that kind of that stress and pain, but ultimately it gives you all the options that you want. It's not a cheap restaurant. There's not 1,000 options on the table, because ultimately that makes it even harder. But we're really honing in on what does your business strategy look like? What do you want to be doing for the next 3 to 5 years? And how will these options be affected based on certain renewals and things that you go for? So we've also got scenarios around sort of data center here. We can look at different scenarios depending on what we're looking to do moving forward. And we can also then look at factoring in things such as what Microsoft have been doing from a price increase point of view, changes to prices as well. And we're looking at forecasting particular changes as well. Again, the benefits of moving between certain license SKUs and certain plans. So factoring in how we Bytes understand the Microsoft market, what we're seeing with other customers, and how we can provide that to you as a customer. And lastly as well, looking at potential sort of features to bring in when we're looking at negotiation. So how can we assist with the negotiation, understanding what part of the agreement you can bring into your negotiation, focusing in on whether it is, as I said, looking at E5 and so on and so forth, and other pieces as well that kind of fits in with that. So that's sort of a whistle-stop tour of the commercial advisory service. I could be here for hours. No one would be grateful for that, particularly the people editing this podcast. So apologize if I talk too much anyway. But ultimately it's all about, I think the one takeaway is understanding as a customer what you're planning to do, get the options on the table. If you're going to make a decision, make sure you're making an informed decision, and Bytes is obviously there to support with supplementing that.
That's perfect. Thank you very much for your time, Andrew. It's been a pleasure to obviously go through all of this sort of information with our customers on the back of doing the other podcast sessions around the journey to E5. So thank you again. And obviously, if anyone watching this has any questions or wants a session with any of us, or on the back of any of the previous podcasts as well, please do get in touch. There's also an array of different podcasts and videos that we've uploaded on our YouTube channel and on Google Podcasts as well. So please take a look at those also. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.